Hello, beautiful people. So this is just a getting started for those of you that have not put any dots down yet. This is the very, very beginning of it all. So first, let me quickly go over your tools. Most of you have started out with these from Amazon. They're very good. I actually use them now instead of my big expensive fancy sets because it's fewer to keep up with. But you can see that they go in size from biggest to smallest. At the end, mine is purple and swirly, but I believe most of you at the end, you have 3 clear ones, and if you just look, you can see that they are in 3 different sizes, descending sizes. So these last 3 would be your clear tools. Mine's purple, just ignore that. And then these are the bigger ones. So what these are for is to make bigger dots like this. So I have gone and taken each tool and made a dot. I encourage you to get to know your tools and do the same thing and play with the different sizes. And that's good practice just for using these rods. It looks really simple, but there's actually a little bit of a trick to it because you want to get nice, pretty, round dots. And the biggest thing, of course, is your paint consistency. But I think most of you, if I'm working with you one-on-one, we've sorted out the paint issue if you're not in the US. And so other than a couple of you that I've talked to, most of us are using the Deco Art Americana. And you do not need any fancy mediums with this. You don't need a thickener, you don't need a thinner, you don't need a pouring medium. It's good straight out of the bottle. You can save all that fancy stuff for later, but when you start messing with different paints. But it comes out kind of the consistency of a poached egg yolk, kind of a runny egg yolk. And you know your paint consistency is good when you lift up and no peak is left behind. The peak falls right back down into the paint. It doesn't stay put. And if it takes more than a second for it to fall back down, your paint is too thick for dotting, at least at the beginner level. But if you're using Deco Art Americana, you're good. The only thing that you may run into is when it's out on your palette, it'll start to thicken up a little bit. And in that case, you don't have to, but you can get a product. Hold on. And it's pretty reasonable. I think it's like $13, but this bottle will last forever. It's by Liquitex. It's called Flow Aid. And you mix this, I mix it in a little dropper bottle. And it's a 20-to-1 ratio. So 20 parts water to 1 part of Flow Aid. So for this little bottle, I filled it up with water and only used a couple drops of the Flow Aid. At any rate, you can use a couple drops of this on your paint to refresh it, and it also slows the drying time, and it also really, because it's called Flow Aid, makes your paint flow nicely, especially if you're doing brush strokes. But I digress. Okay, so when you're placing your dots with the rods, and we'll deal with the rods first. And I'm going to start with a medium-sized rod. So I'm using the blue swirly one. You want to get it in your paint Really get it in that paint. You want the paint to be almost dripping from the tool. The drip won't drop. If you've got too much on your paint, I guess it will, but it normally just sort of hangs on the end of the tool, and that's what you're going for. That's another way you can tell that your consistency is right. So take your tool, and you want to hold it down towards the bottom, so like the bottom third, and you want to hold it straight up and down. Straight up and down. I rest my wrist on the table, and then I place my dot. Now, you can't really see what I'm doing there because my hand is in the way. So let me show you the most important part of using these rods, which is this. Get your paint on your tool, and I'm gonna put my paper sideways so you can see. But remember, I'm straight up and down with the tool. I'm holding it at the bottom third. And when I put my paint on the paper, I don't squash down with the tool. I just kiss the surface with the paint. So you're just kind of dropping off the paint. You do not want to do this. You don't want to press down with that tool, because you see what that does to your dot? It gives kind of an, I don't know if you can see it. See how that dot now has a dimple in the middle? It doesn't make pretty dots when you squash your tool down. You also will tend to, they'll stop. This has a little nick on the side here that's a little, keeps it from being perfectly round. So again, this is, no. You want to dip. And just kiss the surface and come up. And that will give you nice, pretty dots. Now, if you have, do you see this little kind of mound in the center? That was on the first one that we did, but you notice it's kind of spreading out because it will level. But if it bothers you and you don't want it to dry that way, you just take one of your little stylus tools, and I'll go over these in a minute, and just sort of spread that paint around. Okay? But you don't have to do that. That's for now. Let's just work on getting our dots on the paper. Okay, now let's move up to the biggest one, because this is probably what you'll be using most of the time for your center dot, this one or the yellow one. And it gets a little harder when you're using these big, large rods to make the dots. So let me show you. The concept is exactly the same. You hold the tool the same, you still just kiss the surface, but you want to make sure you got a lot of paint on your tool. You really want to get it in there dripping. And then straight up and down. Kiss the surface. It's real important that that you can make a perfectly round, good, pretty dot with this big tool, because if you're going to use that for your center dot, that's the focal point of your mandala. So you want that to be perfect. And on my center dot, what I normally do is I'll then go get more paint, and I'll hover over this and just barely kiss the dot I just made with a little more paint, drop a little bit more paint off, and I'll even do that a third time. And then you really will have a mound of paint. And because it's the center dot, I usually use my yellow tool, the small end of my yellow tool, because that's the pointiest one that you've got in your stylus set. And I will take that while the paint is still wet. You don't want to let it dry at all before you do this, or you'll make a mess. And just smooth it out. I've got a fruit fly problem on my hands right now. We've been battling it. I left some potatoes out and now I can't get rid of them, and they're multiplying. They're landing in my paint. Okay, so practice each of your rods and get comfortable with every one of them. And your dots should be, I don't like to say perfect, but perfect in terms of being round. They should be perfectly round. If they're not, then you need to reevaluate and readjust, or hit me up and show me how you're doing it, and or send me a video of you making the dots. That helps me a lot if you send me a little video of what you're doing. If you're having trouble, I can help diagnose it better that way. Okay, so that's the rods. Oh, and those you would never take a rod, let me get a smaller one. You would never take a rod and dip it in paint and then do something like this. Dot, dot, dot. You see how the dots are getting really icky. You must re-dip the rods in your paint between every single dot that you place. Always. There's no exceptions to that. All right. So now let's look at the ball styluses. So here I said for the rods, for larger dots, must be redipped every time and kiss the surface. So hopefully now that makes a little bit more sense. All right. So larger dots must be redipped every time and kiss the surface. And I'll take a snapshot of this, and anybody that wants a picture of this and anything else that we put on it, I'm happy to send it to you. Okay, so that's it for the rods for now. Now the ball styluses, you have 5 of them. They have a larger end and a smaller end. And usually I am only working with the larger end, except when we get down to the pink tool. I will use both ends, and I rarely use the yellow tool. But if you're looking at just the big end, it goes in size from green being the largest to blue next, then white, large end. And then when you get into these, they're kind of, one end is bigger on one and the other one has the smallest end. So I just call these both my small tools, and we will, like I said, usually use the paint tool, but just play with them and you can see what they do. Now for these, I'm gonna show you what I mean by that in just a second. With these, they're for smaller dots. They do not have to be re-dipped each time. For example, when you're walking the dots, and if you don't know what walking the dots is, I think most of you watched enough YouTube videos by now to know. But for example, these were made with my green stylus, the big end of my green stylus. For the first row, I dipped and dot. And dipped, I'm running out of paint. And dipped and dot. so I get the same size dots across. Let me get some more paint so I don't mess y'all up. So I dipped in between, just like I did for the rods. I dipped between each dot, and that's how you get dots that are the same size if that's what you want. However, if you're wanting to walk the dots where they go from large and then trail off into very tiny dots, then you do not want to dip and dot. You want to dip and then dot, 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 as many as you can get. You should, with practice, be able to get about 10 dots out of a walk. Your last few dots will be tiny, almost invisible. That's what you want, and I'll show you when we start going around a big dot why that is. But do not, if you, let's say that you, and I want you to practice this, just straight lines of walking the dots. But what I don't want you to do is this. You're dotting, you're walking the dots, and you start to run out of paint, and you've run out of paint before you're done with going around whatever you're trying to go around. Do not go back and get more paint and pick it back up, because look what it does. It ruins the whole effect of walking the dots. So you really need to practice this skill. It's basically the fundamental, most important skill in dot art, walking the dots. It's in just about every piece that you'll see. It's beautiful when done right. So I want you to take your styluses and do what I've done, except with more practice, just on lines. So you don't have to do the squares, just do it along the lines. Just rows of walking the dots with each of your tools, the large end, and then when you get to the pink, do the little end, and the yellow, do the little end. You can do the little end of all of them. It's just that on the green, the blue, and the white, the small end is the same. It's the same. It's 1.5 millimeters on all three of them. So that's why I just kind of ignore it, because the big end of your white tool is the 1.5 millimeter. So you already have that size in the big ends. So I just ignore the small ends, except for those last two, the pink and the yellow. Okay, so let's see how we can take that walking the dots and make some art out of it. So we're going to incorporate both our rods and our ball stylus. I'm going to start with a medium dot, center dot, not center of a mandala, but just center that I'm going to be walking my dots around. And I think I'm going to use the pink swirly tool, but you're going to play with all your tools. So don't get hung up on what tool I'm using. I want you to practice with all of them. So I'm going to make, let me get in frame here. Remember, just kiss the surface. Whoop. I'm gonna double dip that one. I have quite enough paint on my tool. Okay. You want to really take your time, guys. You want to enjoy the journey. It's not about just getting to the destination. It's about the journey. That's where the meditation comes from, is going to be found. That's where the therapeutic benefits are found, is in going slow, breathing, and not getting so anxious about your performance. Enjoy it, and your work will thank you for it. But take your time and go slow. You see, just with one dot, I'm sorry. Stop it. You see how just with one dot, I really took my time to get a nice dot there. Don't rush it, or your work will look sloppy. Okay, so I want to walk some dots around this blue dot. Let me get another color. Let's get yellow. Okay, now, great, now the lawnmower is gonna be coming. All right. I like to start with a very small tool for my first row of walking the dots. I like them to be really tiny. So usually I'll start with the small end of my paint tool. So the small end of the paint tool is what I'm starting with. You don't have to play with it, see what you like. Everybody has their preferences as to how they like to do it. Some people like big giant dots walking around. This is just how I like it for me. But you do you. But this is one thing that I do is I put a dot down first, and I kind of tap it a little bit to get a lot of paint off. I want this dot that's the first dot on top to be bigger than the rest of them that I'm going to walk down either side. So I might even triple dip it. I call this my anchor dot. Okay? Then I go back for paint. Then we'll see, I may not make it all the way around, and if not, it's okay, because I'm going to show you how you can get it to where you can make it all the way around. So now I'm not going to redip. All right, that was 9 dots that I managed to get, and I still want this dot right here to be bigger. I want it to look like a necklace, like a string of pearls. And honestly, what I usually do is, because I put all my big dots in my mandala, I'll go through with the rod and put them all the way around, and then I'll take the large end of my paint tool and I'll put that center dot on every one of those that I've made, and then I'll come back and walk them. But if that, what I just said, confused you, just disregard it. It doesn't matter. We'll revisit it when the time comes. Okay, then I go back for more paint. Again, I'm working with the small end of the paint tool, and I'll do the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you're not necessarily going all the way in you don't want them to necessarily ring. I usually leave a space for like 1 dot down at the bottom, because I want it to look like it's ringing, you know, just ringing the dot, as opposed to circling it. But let's do that again. So let's use a different rod this time. I'm using the purple. Which one did I use? Let's use the blue. So a lot of paint. Okay, so that's a smaller dot. Because it's a smaller dot, I want to go with the smallest tool that I have. And honestly, I'll even go and get a toothpick. That's why it's on my Amazon list, is to get the extra long toothpicks, because I'll use a toothpick when my ball styluses aren't small enough. I really like that first ring to be a tiny little string of pearls. And I'll show you here what I mean by how pretty that can look. Some of you might have saw this that I did today, but you see how the dots that I've walked are really tiny. I just think it looks so elegant and intricate. And here, where I've walked the dots around this dot. So what I was saying a minute ago that I said disregard if I confused you, is I'll put all my big dots with the rods down first, all the way around. Then I'll come back and I'll put an anchor dot, the bigger of the walking dots, in the center, all the way around. Then I'll start walking my dots on each side. That way I can use a little bit of a bigger tool to make that anchor dot. See how here it's quite a bit bigger than the rest of them? Same here, bigger than the rest of them. Okay, I don't know if that helped or hurt, but we'll just keep going. At any rate, because I want these, this is a smaller rod that I used, and I want the dots to be really small, I'm gonna take the yellow tool, which has one end that doesn't even really have a ball on it. It's just kind of a point, almost. And let's try that and see. First, I'm gonna take the bigger end of it, and I'm gonna put that anchor dot down. So we're gonna get a nice pronounced anchor dot this time, because that bothered me over there, that it doesn't look right without the anchor dot being bigger. Then I'm going to flip the tool over to the small side, and I'm going to start walking. So that was 9 dots. You should be able to comfortably get 7 to 8 when you're just getting started, and then with a goal of 10. Really load your paint up on your, don't just dip your paint like that. You will not get enough paint on your tool. You want to scoop your paint. Okay, so scoop your paint so that it's almost dripping off your tool. And walk. And your ball stylus, you don't have to just kiss the surface. I usually do at the beginning when I've got a lot of paint on my tool, but you can press down with these. I'm pressing down now with them. Okay, that looks better. Now, do you see what I mean by that anchor dot? Let me zoom in a little bit. Oops. You see how here I didn't get a good anchor dot? It's not pronounced, so it kind of almost looks like this dot is the same size as that dot, if not even maybe a little bigger. It kind of throws off the whole look that you're going for. Where here, because I flipped my tool over to the bigger end and made the anchor dot and then went back to the small end for the walking, I've got a nice effect going. And you see how the dots trail off till they almost look like they're just fading out and disappearing. That's what you want, okay? Your dots should, if you're walking the dots and it's looking like this, you show you what not to do. If you're walking your dots and I'm seeing something that looks like this, that's not the effect you're going for. So what that tells me usually is that when I see that in someone's work, it tells me they've gone back and gotten more paint in the middle of walking their dots because they started to get afraid they were going to run out of paint. And you see how it just doesn't look as pretty as this. You want it to trail off, okay? So that's just a single row of walking the dots, and I'm gonna stop this video here instead of doing multiple rows. We'll save that for the next video. Just practice this with all the different rod sizes, all the different styluses, and get really comfortable with laying down your dots with even your biggest rods, and with walking your dots and having them, get that effect of trailing off. Okay? Until next time, have fun. Bye.